Hi, I'm Mr. Miyagi, and this is Mr. Miyagi's Workshop. Well, today we're talking about paint or polish. What should I do? Well, the big thing is, how much work do you want to do? I polished this case and this other cover here. Took me about an hour and a half, 2 hours. And I used my buffing wheel and some rouge. Now you can get this at your local hardware store or welding shops. A lot of times I'll get the big sticks from the welding shop. It just takes a lot of effort and it's dirty. If you've seen the pictures of before and after, you'll understand. Painting, pretty darn simple. Make sure you seal off the areas. Well, what I did is I just left in the cover and taped off where the seal goes for the kickstart. And that was pretty much it. And then just sanded it, primered it, and spray painted it. And it was all rattle can. So all I basically used was this. An engine paint that you can get from your local hardware or auto parts store. I would look for one of these little handles. They're pretty nice. It makes it easy for spraying. But one of the reasons why I painted this case is because it had a view window, but the bike fell over on it, and I had to weld it up and reseal everything. So I ended up sanding this all out and making sure it was fairly smooth. This is a good case again, except it doesn't have the view window anymore, which, yeah, as long as you got a dipstick, who cares? This one here, basically it just took a lot of effort. You get dirty. It's not a lot of fun. I've polished up the valve caps too along with this. I'm going to use on this motor. And it was just the way I wanted to handle it. I've done a lot of painting of side covers before in the past, but this time around I kind of wanted to do some shiny stuff. Well, while we're here, might as well put in Kickstarter seal. Trusty little hammer. Okay, that's in place now. Well, hey, let's install the oil pump while we're at it. If you missed my oil pump episode, we'll just do it again. So these are the oil pumps are fairly easy. I've checked this one out. When I pulled it out, it looked pretty awesome. I didn't see a lot of wear or any problems with it. I do have a new gear set here if I need to. But this all looks pretty darn good. I gauged it. I think it's going to be a good working unit without any problems. A lot of times what will happen is that you'll develop a crack in this thin area right here. I don't have an example right at the moment, but if you look back on my one of my episodes on oil filters and oil pumps, it goes more thoroughly into it. So when you're doing these, basically, let me clean this out. You want to make sure that the housing is pretty darn clean, or absolutely clean. You can see there was a little wear in there, but it's not all that bad. So what happens here is that we need our lubricant. So I'm going to put in some, use some engine assembly lube. We'll put it in there. This is just to make sure that everything, on that first startup, that everything goes right. So one thing you want to pay attention to when you're putting these together, there's a little arrow that goes towards the case. So it would go in this way. You should not be able to see an arrow. And then on the inner gear, there's another indicator. There's an arrow there. You want to make sure that that's in place. So that's going to go in. So what we have here was we have this main housing with the arrow pointed forward. We have the outboard shaft, which goes in. There we go. And then we have this little the impeller that goes on the inside. But before we get this all together, that little pin needs to be in place. So when you slide the gear down, that pin fits in these little holes here, little cutaways. And you just got to play with it a little bit, and then it'll drop down in place. You can see how this basically works. One side's picking up the oil, the other side is pushing it out. These pins need to be in place. It helps lock everything in together. It's pretty simple. We'll put a little bit more lube on this when we're putting it together and around the shaft. Now that just basically, I want to make sure that I get this all lined up proper. With the pins, these only go in a certain way, and then they drop down in there. We have 3 screws that hold that pump in place. Let me get them all out here. Oh, darn near lost that. Okay, so these screws go down in, and we'll run these down tight. Now you can get the upgraded oil pumps, or you can buy, if you have problems with the old oil pumps, you can buy new gears, inner and outer, for it. So, okay, that's down on there. Let's grab my favorite tool, the impact driver. Well, one of my favorites. So, you want to make sure that these get locked down good and tight. There we go. Next thing that goes on is the drive gear. First off, though, you got to put the carter, there's a key that has to go in the keyway. Push that in there. Next is this gear right here. This is driven by the crankshaft. That key you want to make sure is all the way in there, and you want to line this up so it drops on. So basically this little indent goes down. I'm going to take a little screwdriver and hold against that key as I slide this down on there. There. So what you should have is that key sticking through, because your drive, your tack drive, goes on and it actually captures that key too. So they're all on there. Next goes on. What I just did there is that it wasn't up far enough to put the lock washer on, so what I did is I put the nut on there and screwed it down in there so that I could put the lock washer on. And what it did is it pulled that, pushed everything together and pulled the shaft up into the right position. Turn this over, you can feel the pump itself working. So next, what you want to do is you want to take a screwdriver and put it in one of the teeth right here, and then you can just tighten up, but don't over tighten it. Next thing that can go in is the tack drive. So we want to lube these up, and a little bit down here. Now there is a shim washer that goes on the bottom of this shaft that needs to go on there, otherwise it doesn't ride quite right. So this gets kind of shoved down in there, and that'll just walk right past that other drive and sit in there. Now this outer housing has a hole where this screw goes in and locks it in place to keep it from spinning. One other thing you might want to replace, there's a little seal inside there and an O-ring on the outside. And I would suggest that you replace those. That seal is a bit of a challenge to get out sometimes, but it will come out. Now what you want to do is you want to take that hole, because it's going to, and you need to line up with this one. So just very carefully shove it down on there, and then you're going to have to spin it, maybe pull it back a little bit so that this screw, when it gets in there, will go into that that little hole that I was showing you. Now, before you insert that screw, they make a little copper washer that goes on there. You might be able to find them at the hardware store. But you want to put those on to make sure that you get a good seal there. You want to kind of play with that a little bit until you feel it drop into that little hole on this outer tack drive fitting. All right, so oil pump, everything's installed now. So let's switch over to the filter. Now on this build that I'm doing, I'm going to be using, let's just see what we got in the box of surprises. A lot of people will use these ones from XS, Mike's XS. They use a Honda oil filter. I kind of go back and forth on it. Yeah, I'm thinking we'll just end up using the old style screen filter. These work pretty good. I think you just get a little bit better flow. So pretty simple for the stock unit. Gasket goes in, screen goes in, lockdown goes down on there. Snug that down. The other gasket. I hope this has helped in some way. It's not that difficult on either way, painting or polishing. It's just whatever you want to do, and what your pocketbook will do. Whether you want to buy paint or a buffing wheel and buffing rouge. Well, we've got everything going here. We've got the motor together, and we have a few things else we got to put on. We're going to put on clutch side case. Remember this? We polished it all up. So this is going to slide on. But one of the things we need to do first is put a little lubricant around that seal that you're going to slide over the kickstart. And I'm going to need to place the gasket on. Remembering that you need those dowel pins in place. So let's slip this on. So what we have here are we have 4 long screws and I believe 6 short screws. Now on these long screws, the first 2, you should put on the copper washers. So we'll put those on right there. And that copper washers are just to help seal everything together. And we'll screw these down on there. We also have to put copper washers on these lower ones so that we can seal up, make sure that we got a good seal all the way around. So those are in place. Ran into something kind of interesting. I had to pop the case back off. I've got a stripped out thread here, so we have to put in a helicoil. So I'm going to set up to do that, and I might as well show you how to put one of those in. So what we have to do here is we have to drill out the existing, or what's left of the existing threads. So these helicoil kits come with a drill bit and a tap, hopefully. So now we got to go back in there, and what we're going to do is we're going to tap this in, do a tap here. And this frequently happens on these older cases. You'll get a strip out, and basically what you're doing is you're going to go ahead and re-tap the hole to a larger thread, and then we're going to insert the helicoil. Right now we need to tap this out. So remove the tap. All right. So this what we're replacing here is a 6mm by 1 thread. And before I get too carried away here, I'm going to go in and blow this out and make sure it's all clear. And some of these are different, set up different and whatever, but what this does is usually necks it down so it'll go in there easier. But since this is stepped in there a ways, we're going to have to fight it a little bit. We'll get it started. Okay, so we have the new helicoil in place. So this is just a simple little kit that you can get at your local auto parts store. They're not cheap, but they save a lot of bother, and they're fairly easy to install. So let me double check the threads here. Oh yeah, see, now it screws in there quite nicely. Okay, so we got to put our guide pin back in place. We're going to put the gasket back on. Pops back on there, and you're pretty much good to go. So we're going to tighten that one down first. Oh yeah, see, now that took hold. It's what happens when everything gets over torqued too many times. That's why you've got to pay attention not to over torque these screws when you're doing this. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get my torque wrench and we'll get set up on that. Well, I have my torque wrench here. I have it set for right around 8 pounds. Torque these at 7.5 to 11 pounds on the outer case area here. You can do it by hand. You just got to be careful not to over tighten. And I'm doing a cross pass pattern. Basically, just think of a circle as you're going around. You're going to the different points on the circle. All right, that should do it. So I'm going to walk back around, but I'm just going to walk around the whole thing just to feel it, to make sure. All right. Now I have gone around with my torque wrench and just went down there and tightened them down to where I couldn't turn them. Just snug them down good and tight. You can do that too if you don't have a torque wrench. But like I say, just be very careful when you're tightening these so you don't over tighten them. I think that that's probably what happened down here, is that this may have had a leak and it may not have had the copper washer on it. So they probably were tightening it down to make it seal better, but all they were really doing was stripping out the threads. Okay, so let's move on. What we're going to do now is install the Pamco Ignition. But first we have to set up the crossover rod. So what's going to end up happening here is that this gets pushed through to the other side here. What we have here is the rod that goes through. And this is what the centrifugal advance attaches to. But before we get too involved on this, we have to put the centrifugal advance unit on. And there's a little pin. And if you remember in the episode I told you about when we were doing cam lineups, that there's a little pin or a hole for the pin to go into. Well, that's what I got to do now. This little pin here must be in place. Now, getting this pin to line up sometimes can be a bit of a pain. They really don't like to go in easy. Now, what you can do is once you get it lined up in there, very carefully take a little punch and punch that down. Now, it'll only go in there so far because it stops against these bearings and everything in here. Okay, now that we have the pin in place, we want to install the mechanical advance unit itself. Now, this little notch, I don't know if you can make it out there, this little notch right in this area right here goes, the pin slides into that area, and that little pin there is to keep that pin from coming out. So this just slides up on there, and you want to rock that thing into place and it'll go right in there, keeping your springs and everything out of the way. And then there's the locking nut that goes on there. I find it sometimes easier just take a pair of needle nose and walk that around on it, or just anything to get that to screw down on there. All right, and then once you get it on there, what I do, if I can find it now, so I'll take a little punch and I will tap on these to get that to go a bit tighter. Okay, now we're locked onto the cam. So what goes on now are the little weights. And they go on. First you want to put springs onto them. And then I do suggest, though, you do a little bit of lube on there. And we'll do both of them. When the engine's not running, you're in retard. And when this engine spins, then it's throwing these weights out and puts everything into an advanced setting. Now, there are two little, very thin flat washers that go on here. And these things are tiny. And then you get a spring clip. Now, the spring clips, the spring clips can be a little bit of a hassle. It's like a lot of this little smaller stuff. All right, that one's on. So we have the other little bitty flat washer. We'll put it on. And the other spring clip. Okay, then we're going to put on the connecting rod that goes across on this. Okay, so when you're installing this, is that you need to have this little lineage here and that lineage line up. So what we're going to end up doing is we're going to spread these a little. I just found something. Might be interested. These little notches here that your little weights slide into weren't quite wide enough when they cut this. So it wasn't allowing me to slide it in all the way or to work properly. So I ended up filing it. So those should go all the way out and stop out on the outer. There's two little stops on either side. So this should, when that's spinning, go out. And it wasn't happening on this one. So I had a small square file that I got in there and filed it a little bit. So you might want to pay attention to that to get full movement of your springs or your weights, excuse me, to get this thing to work properly. I think quality control slipped there a little bit. I'm not real sure where I bought that one, but I would really pay attention to that. So let's see what we got here. That's the way that should work. So these go out so it advances it properly. Okay. Yeah, darn near thought I lost that little thing. I mean, these little shims are really thin, small, and can disappear very quickly if you're not paying attention. What you might want to do is you may want to put a little lube on the weights. There we go. So let's pop that back out. And what I'm going to also do is I'm going to apply a little grease on the rod and where it goes in. Remembering to line up that one mark with the other mark so that your timing is correct. Okay, we've spun it around here and we're going to install the breaker point system here. This is a Pamco or whatever they're calling it from Mike's XS. There's several different brands out there. Okay, when installing these, this plate goes in and rides inside there. Now I've kind of marked a little red mark right here. That little tip I'd like to line up with this point right here, just on the other side of that screw. You can see it right there, hopefully. I kind of like to line those up, and that is my starting point to where when I do my timing, that's where I start with. And it seems to be pretty darn close with the stock cam. That's where you want to be in the beginning anyway. So this just gets screwed down there. Now there's one thing that you have to pay attention to is this little divot right there has to line up with that little notch on the back there. And what's happening is that there's some magnets in here. Let me show you. You can see the magnets on the back side. Well, they come through a little bit here, and that's what activates this little switch in here for your points for firing. So anyway, just in case you wanted to know. So this just slides on. So you want to hold that connecting, that crossover rod. You want to hold it till you get down in and you can feel it go in. And then the flat washer goes on. And then I should have a locking nut. Of course we get right here. So then on the locking nut, there is a lock washer there, but I also like to put a little dab of blue. I just feel better with this all kind of locked into place. and then you just tighten it down. You want to make sure that you get a good hold. Just hold on the back side of this, give it a little pressure. This is going to work against the weights. There. So that's in. Now there's a little grommet you want to make sure that gets in place. So you got to just kind of work that wiring so it doesn't rub against anything and fits down in there. So you're pretty much good to go now on the wiring. This just has to go set up to your for how you want to wire the bike to your coils and ignition. So that's basically how you install the Pamco. It's pretty simple. Once you get it started, you can loosen these screws off and adjust your timing by your point down here on your main unit. So I guess at this time too is we can just slip the cover on. I still have to, this bike will still need the clutch cable installed on it. And I made a cover to fit over this. The stock is not the stock cover, but I couldn't find one in the shop, so I said I'd make one. And that was just pretty simple. I just got some lightweight material that I had around here. This is some aluminum that I had. Aluminium. Some people. So we're at the valve adjustment time. And what I like to do, I like to put a little, take the crank and turn it over. Now, what you're kind of watching for, these valves will go up. This one's exhaust is just now just going down. Now the intake is just going down. So what you want to do is you want to set that cam kind of in between that so that these are stable. So that means the other side, we can adjust valves. Now this is a 1980 motor and head. So what we're going to do is we're going to set it to exhaust it at 6 thousandths and the intake at 2. So let's go do the 2 thousandths first. So we have to unlock, and then I made a little notch tool that actually will attach on there. You can bring that in, and what you're doing is you're just going to feel a little snug on that, on the feeler gauge. And you want to hold your upper piece, and you just kind of want to check that a little bit. So you should feel a little drag on that. That feels really good. Okay, let's move on to the exhaust. Same thing. But this is set at 6 thousandths. Little bit of drag. Now basically all I'm doing is I'm pushing this way with the wrench just to hold it to make sure that we get it. So I got it a little bit too loose on the feeler gauge, so we will just snug this a little bit. Feel the drag. Not bad. Okay. Now what we're going to do is we're going to rock this around until we get the same thing that happened on this side on the other side. So intake is going down, exhaust is going down. There we go. So now what we got again on this side, we're right on the top. So we're on the smooth lobe on these. And you should have some movement there. So we're going to do the exhaust first. Okay, that feels good. Perfect. Move to the intake. Oh yeah, perfect. So now what we want to do is we want to rock it over again, and you want to kind of do this a couple of times. Exhaust is going down. Intake is going down. So here we are, we're on both lobes. These are tight. And we'll spread it around one more time here. While we're here, we'll also put in the other little grommet that plugs off the weight area. Okay, so we'll do a feeler. It feels pretty darn good. Let's feel the, see, that's loosened up a little bit. That's why I always kind of like to do these a couple times. I don't know if you watched what I was doing. I was pulling the wrench and this at the same time to get a little extra tension on it. Yeah, that feels good. And then we'll do it one more time here on this side. So we're watching for exhaust is down. Intake is going down. So we're about dead center on these. That's a little on the loosey-goosey side. Just a little bit more. So what I'm doing is I'm pushing against my tappet wrench a little bit. There we go. And then when I want to lock it off, I'm going the opposite direction. So that's a good feel. And we'll do the same thing here on the exhaust. We'll double check it. Although we really don't have to do anything. That feels good. So we've got some cavas. Now what I'm doing, you can either put the gasket on or you can use the O-ring. I like using the O-ring. And these go on. And I don't have the nuts or anything right at the moment. So it's pretty simple. You're just putting the lock washers and the nuts on and you're good to go. Same with the little covers on the side here. You have screws that go into here. I would suggest, though, if you're going to let this motor sit for any length of time, you should put some spark plugs in and make sure that you don't get anything down inside the cylinder. So we can put the side cover on. The side cover can go on as I drop all the screws and everything out. Now, like I said, I did make a cover. I just cut out a round circle and got it set. So these just screw on there. Now I'm not going to tighten these down yet because still have to install the cable, and we'll install that when we get it on the bike. Now we're just going to snug these down a little bit. Let me finish up putting the screws and everything on it and we'll talk about it. Well, we pretty much come to the end of this episode. We went over whether we want to paint covers or polish them. We installed an oil pump. We adjusted the valves. We also put in a helicoil down in here. So that was kind of fun to do. I also, on this one here, since we did install the Pamco Ignition, this is the old pickup for the 1981 motor that we have here, or 1980. It has 4 screws. It has 2 screws that hold it in place and the 2 tailors that guide the wire around. It come out pretty easy. I'm going to hang on to this unit. You never know, somebody might need it. It's a good unit, worked fine. But I went with the Pamco style. You can get, and Mike's XS version, I think Hughes has his style that he used, Hughes hand built. TC Brothers, I'm sure that they sell one and whatever. But that's just what I had laying around, so I put it in the motor. I think what we're going to end up doing is I do have a set of carburetors that we could put on this, but they need to be rebuilt. So we might do a little bit of an episode on those. install those and put on some funky exhaust and maybe kickstart it on the floor and get it warmed up and fired up so that you can actually see that this motor runs. But like I said, I don't have anything to put this in right now. It was just a motor I had laying up in the loft up there that needed some tender loving care, as they put it. So anybody out there have a frame with a title? I'm looking. I'd like to build another dual sport. I've built enough choppers in my day, so you want to see one? There you go. That's a 1980 XS with a rephase motor. That's the bike that my wife rides. Mrs. Miyagi's bike. It's all set up with long distance extra fuel. Hardtail frames, one of my custom ones that I build. My exhaust system. Side bag for storage. Bare seat pan. She has requested that I put some leather on it with some padding, so we're going to do that. She's been all the way to Nebraska in this thing and all the way down through California and everything, so it's a good running bike. I have another one of these. It's now in the UK. My old running bike. Kind of miss that bike because it had a rephase motor, but this is one of Hughes's hand-built rephase crank and cams that he did. I sent my cam and crank off and he rephased them. So anyway, just in case you're interested. So this is Mr. Miyagi signing off. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode on paint or polish and finishing off the motor to a certain stage. If you have any comments or questions about what I did or what's going on, please put them in this comment section below. If you have a frame with a title, please put it in the comment section below and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. But thanks again for watching. I really appreciate my subscribers and the people that watch my channel. I try to entertain and put out some knowledge. So y'all take care. You be safe out there. But wait, if you like it, please like, share, and subscribe. And hopefully I'll see you on the road.